Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swizz, and we're continuing on with our pre-season chat. We've got MiniMonk from the coaches panel. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm going well. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be able to chat about the team I support, and I think they're a very interesting team for Supercoach in 2025.
Absolutely, mate. And I know you've been doing some great work in this pre-season, especially with MJ, a lot of Fremantle players who are relevant this season. Before we jump into that, where can the good folk out there find you, mate?
They can actually find me at the Coaches Panel podcast. So MJ's coming to the end of the 50 most relevant. We're into the single digits now. I think we had the last Fremantle player release, which was good fun to do that podcast with him. I know that you were able to steal away one of my Fremantle boys during the countdown, which was a bit sad, but we got to share around the love. And you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days at MiniMonk10.
Yeah. And as always for us, check us out on all our social media platforms, in particular the YouTube, Spotify. Get in contact with us via X, Supercoach Insider 100 or Swizz26 for me directly. And you are very right, mate. You guys have been doing a great job with that top 50. There are so many relevant Fremantle players. If you haven't already, you can still check that out. They've been doing releases every day, but you can go back and have a look. They're on Spotify, YouTube. So definitely well worth the watch. And also my episode there with my man, Caleb Sarong.
Yeah, no, that was a great episode to listen to.
I appreciate that, mate. All right, so Fremantle this year. We'll just start off with yourself, mate. We're thinking expectations this season. Where do you see the Fremantle Dockers, and what do you think? Where do you think they'll finish, and kind of best case, worst case scenarios?
Oh, look, it's hard to keep a cap on how my expectations are for them. I think the acquisition of Bolton was exactly the type of player that we need. And we're still such a young squad that's continuing to improve. I would be hoping that we can finish somewhere around the top 4 marker and at least win a final this year. And I think if we're able to do that, that's at least meeting the bar. But I think what the aim for the club should be would be play in a prelim final. I think if they're able to achieve that puts them on the pathway to being able to achieve the ultimate glory in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's ultimately what the club is aiming for with the way that they've built this list.
And I think, yeah, when it comes to recruiting, you're obviously neck deep with Chad Warner. And if you're close enough there, I think that could definitely sway him come season's end.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very interested to see how the Warner chat continues, because it seems like both clubs both Freo and West Coast are fighting very hard for him. I think the fact that we picked up Bolton makes me think that we're less likely to pick up Chad, but I think we'll have a couple of other draft targets and people that we're eyeing off in trade period as well. So I think we'll still be a big player in the 2025 trade and draft period as well.
Yeah, well, the Cozzy Pickett chat does not go away, and I think that'll be dominating headlines here in Melbourne for most of the season. So, yeah, either one, Warner, either it's to the midfield or Pickett to that forward line, would be unreal additions to that Fremantle lineup.
It would make picking the best 23 for the club even harder than what it already is. I think, you've got a possible predicted lineup there at the top left, and I think about 21 or 22 of those players almost picked themselves coming into round 1. You throw someone like Chad Warner or Cozzy Pickett in, and you've got players that are inside of the 2s that are pushing hard for spots in this year, let alone a year later. I think it might become very tricky come 2026 as well.
Yeah, well, we were talking off air about what that possible round 1 lineup could look like. There is a couple of minor injuries, nothing major, unlike a few of the other sides. So that is a good sign. So Ryan Pearce, Chapman, Clark, Cox, and Walker seems like a settled back 6 with Wagner as the 7th coming off the bench. Sharp, Young, O'Driscoll. It looks like Sharp and O'Driscoll sort of been fighting with Amira at that wing spot. He's been playing quite well in the match sims, Amira, but we'll still go with that. And then the other, the forward line, Bolton, Tracy, Frederick, Jackson, Miss, and Swilikowski. Nothing changes there. Eliza Riley's notes are there from her latest viewing of the match sim, and she did talk about Jackson being absolutely everywhere, but still starting forward, even with Darcy out. Reedy comes in for now because Darcy looks likely to miss at least round 1 with Sarong and Brayshaw. And then we've got Warner, Johnson, Simpson comes into that lineup, Sturt, and that's Simpson's coming in for Fife, who is likely to miss, we've said round 1, but it just depends on how long they're going to want to take to him. And then Amira is the sub, mate. What do you think of that starting 23?
I think it's basically what I would be looking for. I mean, Darcy is the probably biggest notable omission in your ruck line. And I think basically the 18 that are on field to start almost pick themselves going into the list. I think Wagner has cemented himself pretty clearly as the 7th defender and Johnson as the 4th midfielder, especially with the ability for Johnson to be able to rotate onto the wing and provide a chop out for O'Driscoll and Sharp. And so it's really just those last 3 spots with the likes of Simpson, Sturt, O'Meara, Erasmus, Fife. They're all really fighting for 3 spots in the team. And I think that that's a very healthy position to be in, but it also makes it a very interesting conversation to have about some of the players that are getting a lot of love from Fremantle in the rookies themselves.
Yeah, for sure, because you've picked up a very highly touted rookie in Murphy Reid, who has been looking pretty good in match sim. And you've also got Neil Erasmus, who a lot of people are looking at putting in their teams, who we don't, obviously, both of us don't have him there as yet, but didn't do anything wrong when he was playing in the match sim the other day, kicked a couple of goals from that inside midfield. I probably should talk about Erasmus now, mate. What are your kind of thoughts of him?
I think he's a good player, but I think he doesn't provide enough that's different to what Fremantle already has in that inside midfield. I honestly don't see him playing regular games early unless one of, say, Sarong or Brayshaw actually gets injured, because he contrasts very differently to someone like Johnson, because Johnson has a lot more versatility. He has a lot more flexibility to be able to play half forward, to be able to play wing. But Erasmus has to be a CBA midfielder just because of the way his size, his build, his profile, essentially. And so when I look at the Supercoach team picker and see that, he's the most selected Fremantle docker by, over 30%, it doesn't shock me, because people have seen the name, they've heard a lot about him during the preseason, they see the price tag and the fact that he's a forward and they just slot him in. And that's fine. Obviously, someone like him is a rookie placeholder. If he's not named round 1 or if he's named as the sub, you just rotate out of it. But I would be planning for contingencies and trying to find maybe just spending up a little bit more rather than having a 119K player guy just sitting on the bench, and maybe have someone that's around the 150, 160K marker in case you need to be able to pivot off to or onto someone like Erasmus.
Yeah, well, you're right. So at time of recording right now, he's at 49% ownership, which does seem very high. Like, yes, he's at it's a good price point, but when you've got probably other rookie players who also have that dual position, I think they're probably much more safe for the start of the season. Like, especially some like, you look at the West Coast players, the Richmond players, in that same sort of price point, you're probably more safer to go there. Not to say he won't get opportunities at some point, but I agree with you. He does need that opportunity to open up long term.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing. I think he's a player that will get, games throughout the season, but he'll get games where he is the sub. He'll get games where he is subbed on, and he might be out for 2 weeks, in for 2 weeks. And to me, that's really hard to take on as a starting rookie, because you don't know what the price is going to do. You don't know when you're going to need the cover. And I'd rather pay 15, 20K more, get a player who doesn't have as much of a ceiling, but has the consistency in the role, has the consistency in being the best 23 every week, and has the potential to have a pop score at a good week and be able to rise in cash as a result of that.
Would you even consider, say, Will Brodie ahead of him, or do you think it is still Erasmus? No.
Yeah. No. Will Brodie is there if everything goes wrong. If, he'd have to have 3 injuries to that midfield to be playing, I think.
Yeah. Somebody also at Brodie's price is Nathan O'Driscoll, who we've got there. Slightly getting a little bit more love. He's still at 2%, but I know a few people talking about him a little bit more just because he does seem set on that wing position. It's always hard because he's probably going to be more that defensive winger, which can sort of give us sort of those lower scores, which at 198K does make it hard to pick. Is that a guy that you've even at any point considered? Is that somebody we should even consider, because he looks like he's going to be starting 18? But do you think is there too much risk there, or what are your thoughts about Nod this year?
I think Nod is someone that we absolutely should be considering. I think his price tag is really attractive. I think in my opinion, he's a lock for the best 22 in the club come round 1 and for at least the first 5 or 6 weeks. The club really likes what he's able to provide, being able to run up and down the ground, but he also plays almost as a 5th midfielder at stoppages. he'll quite often have the wing opposite to the side that where all the stoppages are starting to occur, where Freo is going to go long down the line to, whereas Sharp, because of his endurance and his speed, is the one that gets the far side wing away from all the contests. And so that gives him the ability to actually get a lot of stoppage attendances and midfield time in that manner. It won't show when you look at stuff like CBAs, but if we were able to track stuff like stoppages and attendance at stoppages, I think he would be someone that will actually get quite a lot of those and have the ability to be able to score because of that.
And he did really burst on the scene for us in 2022. Unfortunately, then got injured. But yeah, he did show his ability to find the ball. He had those back-to-back 100 games as well. So here is a guy who, even in that role, can turn up, can help out the half back line and drop back as that seventh guy, or even play. I feel like sometimes it's a bit Dan Houston-like, playing sort of maybe 40 meters back from the ball and can push up then to that contest if need be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of clubs are starting to evolve in having players that can really do a multitude of roles. And someone like O'Driscoll, in combination with Johnson being that, I guess, fourth midfielder, provides a lot of flexibility if something goes wrong, if a player gets injured mid-game, if you need to rotate someone out or a matchup isn't working. But I think for the majority of the time, he will be either at the stoppage when it's at his wing, or he'll be hanging just behind or leading up just in front and being as kind of like a seventh defender and rotating back to help them out.
Yeah, for sure. And while we're actually on talking about rookie price players, Cooper Simpson, 119k forward, and this might be the sort of the answer if you've already got a guy in your midfield, or if you've got Rasmus in your forward line that you can kind of move players around. Simpson looks like he could be an early starter, especially with that Fife injury early.
Yeah, I think he is in the frame to play in round one. I don't know how confident I'd be in him staying in the team and therefore putting him into my Supercoach side. I think, it's the same thing as with Erasmus. His price tag is appealing. The fact that he's a forward is appealing. If he's staying round one, some people will go there. I just think it's a pretty scary prospect. There's every chance that he just gets 3 or 4 touches, only scores the 20 points and is out of the team the next week. And then you've got a dead rookie just sitting there. I think that as much as I want to spruik and hype the Fremantle boys, my feeling would be better value elsewhere.
And the last rookie guy that I need to touch on is Liam Reedy. He has spent a bit of time in my team, especially when I was handcuffing him to Sean Darcy. It's probably a little bit less appealing now that Darcy's come out of my side, but still as probably the automatic guy that comes next in, especially if there's a late injury to Darcy. What do you sort of see his prospects? We know he obviously struggled in his couple of games last year, but he is mature age, and he's definitely the guy that they want to go so they don't kind of ruin their structure with Jackson.
Yeah, I think that Reedy is exactly the player that will come in if Darcy were to miss any games. I think Freo have tried and don't like with Jackson playing in the ruck for 80% of game time. I think it doesn't really suit the structure that the team is trying to achieve. So the question will be, come round one, how long is Darcy going to be out for? I know you got on the screen that he's likely to be there for about round 2, round 3. I don't think he'll be out of the team for that long. And the minute that he's fit, Freo will want to try and get him back into the team. So unless Darcy has another setback, I probably wouldn't be going there. But if at any point during the season, Darcy's out for 4, 5, 6 weeks, heaven forbid, I'd seriously be considering him, especially with the fact that we have that flex position now, which can allow you to rotate and bring in a player that's a bit more speculative that you can ride for 5 or 6 weeks and then be able to trade out to anyone else in the competition, not just having to trade them to a ruckman.
Yeah, you're right. That flex position opens up so many options now. And if you do get the right situation, so if you've got, say, a Boyd, you could bring Reedy into that flex position. If Boyd fattens up, you can then move Reedy into that R3 to get Boyd's cash. Or, you can just keep him there in that flex position until Reedy fattens up, and then hopefully, you get enough weeks out of him, and you can then move him on. So it does give us some options there, where probably in the past it would have not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's one that people really need to start experimenting with, the ability to be able to trade that person that ends up in the flex position to someone in any line. I don't think it's been spoken enough yet this preseason, but I think that is going to become a huge thing, especially during the early rounds where your trades are just going to get chewed through when you're going to be looking at upgrading as fast as you can and using those boosts that we have available to us.
For sure. Which it'd be wrong of me for not to touch onto the premiums, because there are some great premiums in the side. The big discussion is Sarong versus Brayshaw. A lot of people don't want us to go the two. I've been tempted by actually starting both, because I think on any given week, one's going to get off the chain and the other, might get a little clamped down. Do you have a preference, or do you think it's just because the fact that they do have the same buy, and it's actually a pretty friendly buy, that you could potentially look at starting both?
I think you could absolutely look at starting both, especially with the fact that they're sharing it with St Kilda. And I don't think there's any St Kilda midfielders that we would be looking at this stage, probably not even considering as premiums for 2025. I'm not sure I would start both. I have been tempted by it. My AF background does sway me a bit more towards Brayshaw in that format, but in Supercoach, I see it a lot more as a genuine 50-50, especially with the fact that their prices are so close to each other, and their ability and how well they've scored in the past is also quite close to each other as well. The reason why I like Brayshaw, I think, is just because he's able to get off the chain a little bit harder than what Sarong is. He finds his way into getting involved in those +6, or the kick marks in Supercoach, I should say, and being able to get involved in a lot of that link-up play, whereas Sarong is a lot more limited to what he's doing in and around the ball, which obviously scales well for Supercoach, but does leave him a lot more vulnerable when it comes to the tag. And I think if a tag does come to a Fremantle midfielder, that the likely target of that is going to be Sarong, because he is just so damaging in and under, and when he pushes the ball out of stoppages and goes forward.
Yeah, no, I like that. I must admit, Sarong has not left my team, because I feel like as those who haven't or have already listened to the coaches panel episode there, I've sort of been big on him. The fact that I feel like there was games last year where Fife was taking bulk CBAs. There was definitely two of them where he was the number one guy on that, and that will dramatically drop this year. So that is actually a slight tick for Brayshaw and Sarong, because we won't have them. They'll be the clear number 1 and 2 in most games. So I feel like there is that little tick, and because of Sarong's averages, but Brayshaw as well. But at home games, like Sarong was just off the charts with home matches last season, and now they've got the extra home game thanks to North Melbourne. So that should just see another little spike up, where I think both players are just slightly undervalued, and there's definitely 3, 4, 5 points, and that might be all we need to have them in that sort of top 6 range for both of them.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're not considering either of them, I think for your starting midfield, I think you're making a mistake. I think having at least one of them sets you up well for the buys, presents good value. They have a really great starting fixture, which allows for captaincy as well. I think you could make an argument for either of them, but I think that you need to make an argument for at least one of them in your starting squad.
And the two that I probably can't get my head around, and I've spent time in my side, just because I feel like is Freo going to try to do a little bit more attacking from that back line. We did see sort of a different change of game style throughout the second half of the year. But Luke Ryan and Jordan Clark, my initial feeling is Ryan slightly regresses and Clark could potentially have a little bit of a bump, just because I think that's how Freo play. But mate, you're the expert on that team, so what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with the Ryan regressing. I think, his 130 average over the first 10, 12 weeks of 2024 was unsustainable. It's elite levels of scoring for someone who plays as a third tall defender, and we really haven't seen someone being able to do that for a consistent run, aside from James Sicily, really. And so the regression is in my mind there for Ryan. I would probably advise people away from starting him, despite how good he has been for such a long period of time. It might only be 3 or 4 points, but it's probably enough to scare me off. Whether or not that leads to a bump for Jordan Clark is hard for me to say exactly. I think that he at least maintains what he averaged in 2024, but I'm not sure I see an increased pathway to scoring for him easily. I think Freo will try to move the ball a bit faster from that back line and get it forward, and make use of the likes of Bolton and Switkowski and Frederick as being that small mosquito-like fleet and being able to really keep the ball in their inside 50 area. And that might see a lot less of that chip mark game style that has allowed both Ryan and Clark to score significantly higher in 2024. So I think that I don't think I would be considering starting Ryan, but Clark could end up in that top 10 defenders, which might be close enough. But I don't know how much of an increased pathway to scoring he does have.
Yep, I think that's a great point. Shea Bolton's still in. I think it's about 12% aside. So I was sort of looking at before the move over. People kind of looking for that cheaper potential premium offer option in the forward line. I think he's going to be a fantastic addition to Fremantle. I think it completely changes them. But I don't think he's going to get the CBAs up the ground like he did at Richmond. But he could definitely be a good link between that midfield and the forward line. How do you kind of see him settling in?
Very much so. I don't see him getting bulk CBAs like he did at Richmond, where he was getting nearly 40 to 50%. We talked about it earlier with Brayshaw, Sarong, Young being the core three. I'd be shocked if Brayshaw and Sarong don't get about 80% each and Young gets 70%. And, that's already 2 out of 3 CBAs basically chewed up by those 3 players. Then you've got to rotate the likes of Johnson, 5. Even Switkowski and Nathan O'Driscoll will probably get the occasional CBA. Bolton might get 3 or 4 a game when they just need to change something up, when they need to put some spark into that midfield to try and get it moving. In terms of how much link-up play he gets, it's very interesting because Freo do have a couple of good link-up type players in Frederick and even in Sturt and Switkowski, who do push up quite hard and allow for the bailout kicks down the line or the chip kicks into the middle to allow the ball to transition. Bolton is someone who's also very good at that. So whether it leads someone like Switkowski to being a more stay-at-home forward and being that real precious small forward, I could see that happening. But I don't think that it's enough of a pathway for Bolton to becoming someone who's relevant in our forward lines for 2025. As a starting pick, there's probably a little bit of fat on the bone. It's maybe 5 points, but I think it's very similar to what I've said for some of the other players. I think there's a lot of other players that have a very similar price tag that just presents so much more value than someone like Bolton does.
Yeah. And I know good colleague of mine is Damo, who's been real hot on Hayden Young. He's obviously signed the massive contract, might be the most, might have the longest contract, second longest contract in the AFL right now. Yeah.
He has the longest one in the AFL at the moment.
So at that cheaper price point, I know it's hard because we're trying to fit, can we play both Sarong and Brayshaw? And then there's a third guy just behind him. How much sort of growth? Because I feel like he's the one that's probably got the most growth out of that midfield group, just because natural progression is going to spend a little bit more time in that midfield. Did have a little setback with the hamstring, but seems to be fine to get up for that match sim game. So he, is definitely somebody that is appealing at his price. But what do you see the maximum where he could sort of go and end up this season?
Oh, I think he could be a 110 midfielder. But the biggest thing that scares me with someone like Young, there's 2 things that really do scare me, is that one, towards the end of the season, Freo did try and push him forward a lot more in matches. And when he was resting, he was the one who actually pushed forward and allowed someone else to come into the CBA. Whereas Brayshaw and Sarong were purely just CBA midfielders at the end of the season. And the other thing is just Hayden Young's floor. I mean, you look at Brayshaw and Sarong, they do have a really stable floor where they don't really drop below 80. But if you look at Hayden Young, there's about 5 or 6 games in 2024 where he dropped below that mark. And I will say that a lot of those games did come earlier on in the season, and he found his footing in that midfield a lot better towards the second half of the season. At best, he could turn into someone that's very much like Butters and Bontempelli, where he can rotate between being a 70% centre bounce midfielder and 20% forward and get to those 120 heights. But I think that might be 2 or 3 years down the line once he's perfected his midfield craft, and not probably something that I expect to see from him in 2025.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. Anybody else you think it's worth covering? Or I think we've covered the pretty well all the relevant Fremantle Dockland players.
I think that's really it, really. I mean, there were a lot of people like myself that were actually interested in Sean Darcy before the setback. If he's eased back into the season, he might be one to definitely monitor if his price comes down and you've got a value ruck that you've started at R2 or in the flex position. But aside from that, I don't think that's I think that's the bit. I think it's realistically, it's one of the Fremantle midfielders. Maybe look at someone like a Jordan Clark and probably just ignore the rest, despite how fantasy relevant we might be for 2025.
Yeah, at least this year, because of that flex position, somebody like Sean Darcy can become relevant any point throughout the, because where before we've just been sort of, you might be locked into the two rucks with a bit of a set and forget strategy. But this year, yeah, we can obviously, if he was looking fit and firing and played some, managed to put some games together, we definitely could go there as a flex and a backup to our rucks.
Yeah, but I think you'd want to see it for a couple of weeks and see the things starting to turn around, like his time on ground, his CBA percentage as well. And one of the things I quite often look for in the preseason is players that have value built in, who have an interrupted preseason, and then who come back and their price dips. And he's someone who could have that. His price could dip to the 450 marker. And if his time on ground and CBA percentage starts to tick back up, I think it'd be someone that I would very much look at bringing into, as that could be a potential season-defining pickup.
No, I like that, mate. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, talking Fremantle Dockers. I know you love the Dockers, so it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to chat some Supercoach with someone else other than MJ. I do like talking to him, but I need a little bit of diversity in my life now and then. So thank you very much for having me.
No problems. Keep checking us out, our preseason content. We're only a week away from the match sims, and we'll have plenty updated there soon. Thanks for joining us, guys. See you soon.